my pleasure to introduce today's luncheon speaker, Mayor Stephen Wukela. You know, over the years, Florence has had a number of extraordinary mayors: Haig Porter, Rocky Pierce, Frank Willis, to name some of the more recent ones. Mayor Wukela continues that tradition, and he has enriched it. He's energetic, he's innovative. Stephen's a natural consensus builder. He also understands municipal administration and municipal policy, and he appreciates the nexus that joins the two. Now, to be sure, many of the people in this room this morning deserve credit for the revitalization of downtown Florence. But at the center of almost any major project, you'll find Mayor Wukela, City Manager Drew Griffin, and Development Director Ray Rich working to enhance, facilitate, and integrate the project with the overall development downtown. But to be sure, it's the mayor's unique political insight, it's his acumen, and it's his tenacity that we've all come to depend upon to get things right the first time around. He's a graduate of Clemson University. He holds a JD from George Washington University, and he's a partner in the Wukela law firm. He and his wife Laura have 3 sons, Stephen, Thomas, and William. Fortunately, they all look like Laura. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the most dynamic and collaborative mayor in the entire state of South Carolina, Stephen Wukela.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I stayed up all asleep last night wondering what he was going to say up here. You know, Fred has become a great friend of mine, and it must be said a mentor. I tell you, I remember one of the first times I was in his office, and many of you who've been in there have noticed he's got a poster in the corner. And in that poster, in real large font, it says, "No one wants to fight." And then in small font, it says, "But somebody needs to know how to." Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Carter is the premier consensus builder in this state, but he also knows how to fight. And I have come to depend on and respect him. Thank you so much for what you've done for the university and what you've done for our city, Dr. Carter. Mike Miller, we're proud to have you. The city looks forward to working with you in a collaborative way as you all move forward with the chamber in a new direction. I know the chamber's excited, the community's excited, and so we look forward to our future together. And to my wife, Laura Wukela, who's here with me today, you know, Laura and I met at Clemson, and I was able to convince her to marry me and go off to law school with me and get her to work to pay for law school. That was good. And then we were deciding where we were going to go. And a lot of my friends were going to D.C. or New York to practice law. And we made the conscious decision to come back home because we love this community and want to continue to be a part of this community. She's been enormously patient as I've spent nights away from home and from her and our family and from my law practice and the ability to earn money for her and my family because she realizes how important what we're doing is. And so thank you for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, our city is in a state of historic growth and expansion. And that we're entering an era that rivals this city's experience at the turn of the 20th century, a time when railroads and entrepreneurs built a sleepy village into a center of commerce. Now, those folks were not sentimental. They were fiercely practical. They were driven by enterprise, not ideology. And they had the pride and audacity to build great buildings and the daring to build this great city. Their confidence and their boldness has been rekindled by a new generation of leaders in this community. Leaders of government and business, leaders of the community at large. Citizens who are again driven by that fierce practicality, driven by enterprise, and driven by the desire to rebuild a great city. Together, with a unity of purpose, we focus that energy, not on glorifying or romanticizing our city's past, but on building a stunning new fusion of the old and new. Together, we're building a great city, and a city at its best again. And we have focused our efforts, I think quite appropriately, first on our center, on our downtown. You know, I spoke at State of the City a year ago, and I declared that our city was in a state of renaissance. And I'm here to tell you today that that renaissance is continuing with increasing momentum and vigor every day. It started with the new library, new little theater, new performing arts center, new museum. And then we had that magnificent event of the new massive private investment of the Hotel Florence and Victor's downtown. That investment showed a number of things. One, it showed private entrepreneurs' commitment to spending their own money, large amounts of their own money, in downtown Florence, on Evans Street in Florence. And it also showed the city's commitment to incentivizing that investment. And it set the mold for ways we would move forward in the future, funding and incentivizing those investments by using the dollars generated by the investments themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, if the city were to depend on the general fund, there's no way we could have ever produced enough revenue to incentivize the private investment downtown that we've been able to create. But we learned with the Hotel Florence project that you could create those incentives and you could create those dollars by leveraging the projects themselves. And the Hotel Florence is a perfect example of that, because that building itself was generating $500 in property tax when we first considered that project. And Tim and Gray and all those guys came to us and said, we want to spend $7 million in this property. And we knew if they did that, the property tax would increase to $100,000 a year. We were able to create a system where we rebated 85% of that for 7 years, still generating for the city $15,000 where we were getting $500 a year, and creating the incentive for them to be able to make the investment that we so desperately wanted to make. We used the same method with water and sewer revenues, of course, because the city provides water and sewer for the entire region. And that has enabled us to leverage and create investment that there's no way we could have done before, and to do it without any tax increase. And that has created, just in 2 years, 100 new jobs for that project alone, and over $29 million worth of economic impact just in those first 2 years. That one project alone. That changed the stage. And what followed was private investment after private investment. So same developers invested in the Barringer building, creating approximately 15 jobs in a fine new facility there, and dress shop and office space. Same with the Waters building. As you can see, they're just putting the windows in there. They anticipate that that building will be up and running by May. It will house some 40 jobs, including the Haynesworth Sinclair Law Firm, the King Love & Smith Law Firm, the Hillard Lyons Investment Group. Other groundbreakings will be coming also in coming months. And I just want to speak to just a very few of them. The first one I want to speak to is the massive investment by Mr. Mike Rickenbach in downtown Florence. Over $4 million Mike is investing, staying in the community, staying downtown, when there are very good business arguments that perhaps there are other places that have higher traffic for it. But thank goodness Mike has acknowledged and seen the importance of downtown and continuing and investing downtown. He's made that commitment, and Mike, I know you're here today. I want to thank you so much for that investment. There are other numerous examples. One is the Crest project. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a group, New Florence Development LLC. Many of you have read about this. And these are all local investors, people we know, Ken Ard, Ken Jackson, Jimmy Brown, Frank Chisholm, and others. And they have made the commitment to invest over $10 million at the intersection of Dargan Street and Evans Street. It'll be a mixed-use project that'll include restaurant space, professional space, a rooftop terrace, but perhaps most important, it'll contain loft apartment space, which means that we're turning the corner to beginning to bring residential development into downtown Florence. And everyone who's ever done this before will tell you that you begin with public investment and nonprofit investment, then you begin to have private investment. But then the real turning the corner is when you have residential space. And when that occurs, you have more traffic and more people, and then that develops retail development, and then it's Katie bar the door. And that's what's beginning to happen. That project was developed and incentivized using precisely the same incentive model that we used with the Hotel Florence. That's one of the reasons that project was so important, because it set the standard on how we can do incentivizing development downtown. And it's worked fantastically because of the new water and sewer revenue that this project will bring in, because of the new property tax revenue this project will bring in. We're able to use precisely the same model to generate $2 million worth of incentives for the Crest project without requiring any money from the general fund at all, and certainly without requiring any millage increase at all. And that project will turn the corner up North Dargan Street. What many of you may not realize is the old Crest department store is in an L shape, and the north side of that is about a third of the way up North Dargan Street. And it will continue to have massive effects up North Dargan as it develops. And that will be happening in the coming months. Another project I'm very proud of is the Hope Health project. You know, as many of you know, Hope Health is a fantastic clinic that is able to provide top-notch care to folks at every income level. Because of its status as a federally qualified healthcare facility, it treats folks who have Medicare or Medicaid, but receives 2 or 3 times the reimbursement that a private doctor would receive. In exchange, they treat folks who have no revenue or very little revenue, and those folks pay on a sliding scale. Now, Hope Health has increased dramatically in size over the years, starting at somewhere like 2,500 square feet, then up to 12,000 square feet. They now need 50,000 square feet. And they were looking at making that expansion at their current location on Palmetto Street. Well, the city came to them and said, listen, we've got property on North Dargan at the intersection of Dargan and 52, bordered on the top by Lucas Street, on the south by Darlington Street, on the east by Dargan Street, and on the west by Irby Street, that property that was formerly a junkyard. And the city and the Bruce Lee Foundation and the federal government have invested over $3 million in obtaining all that property and clearing it of contamination. But we were looking for development for that project. Well, Hope Health stepped up and said, we need additional land. We consider going to that property. It's proximate to the community that we're trying to reach. And they have now announced that they are moving forward with a $10 million investment there that will begin at 50,000 square feet, but then will eventually grow up to 100,000 square feet, where they'll provide primary care, as well as radiological services, pharmacy services, and perhaps ultimately pediatric services, right there in the center of downtown Florence, changing from what used to be a junkyard and a blight on the community to a critical investment and an example of downtown moving forward. We're very proud, and we're particularly proud also that they will serve their first year some 20,000 citizens, over 60,000 visits, and over half the persons who are below the poverty level. And they will employ some 200 people. We're very proud of what Hope Health is doing, and we anticipate that their construction on that facility will also begin in May. And then comes the Francis Marion University Health Science Facility project. I can't tell you how important this is to our community, how important it is to downtown, and how proud I am to be even a small part of this project. As most of you probably know, this idea began with a consortium between Francis Marion University, USC Medical School, McLeod Hospital, and Carolinas Hospital, with the idea of bringing a regional clinics campus of the USC School of Medicine, 3rd and 4th year medical students to receive their clinics training, along with a graduate Francis Marion program for nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and nurse educators. The project has continued to blossom, and it will now represent over $16 million worth of investment downtown, with the state of South Carolina bringing $5 million plus the operational costs, the Bruce Lee Foundation bringing $7.5 million, and the City of Florence committing $3 million, as well as the commitment to obtain and clear the site. That brings us to the site. The consortium and Francis Marion considered numerous sites, and none worked because of location or because of cost, and the funding was in place, and we're getting closer and closer to the time which this project needed to begin. I was very concerned that we were going to lose this project to downtown, and I knew how important it was. So the city ultimately suggested, the location of the old trust building. And this building, of course, was built, again, at the turn of the 20th century. At that time when these entrepreneurs were changing this community forever. And it was an example of the city's growth at that time and that era. Unfortunately, in the intervening decades, it fell into disrepair. The roof collapsed. It filled with water decades after decades. Our engineers tell us that in order to rehabilitate the building, you would have to strip it to its concrete beams and pillars. We tried desperately to try to redevelop that building with a number of developers, the city did, including the group that did the Hotel Florence and Victor's project. But unfortunately, practical realities meant that it was just not economically feasible. It was going to cost over $9 million to attempt to rehabilitate that building. And you just could not make the numbers work. Ladies and gentlemen, the city, I believe, has demonstrated its strong commitment to downtown, to restoring and reusing historic buildings. But our commitment to history does not and cannot ignore practical reality. This trust building is an example of the ambition and the temerity of the entrepreneurs that built this city at the turn of the century. But we don't honor their achievement by ignoring the very practical enterprise that they embodied. Instead, we must honor and restore the memory and the record of what they built where we can, and where we cannot, we must build our own history. Ladies and gentlemen, the contract for the demolition of the trust building has been let. The city is moving forward with that clearing. The Francis Marion University Health Science Building will be underway this summer. Its architecture is expected to be fantastic, to mirror the classical style of the old post office that's just across the street. Its presence downtown will change Florence permanently. And I believe that a century from now, future citizens will look back and honor that building as an example of the pride and audacity of our era. This momentum has continued and must continue and will continue. The next era that we're moving into will surpass the last one in the amount of growth that you're going to see in downtown Florence. In April, my city council will meet and I believe pass the first reading of bonds based on revenues from the TIF and from the hospitality tax. Now, if you've been reading the news, you've heard this word TIF over and over again, and it's not always clear exactly what is meant by that. Let me explain what the TIF is. TIF is Tax Increment Financing District. And what it is that the state legislature authorized municipalities to create these districts, these tax increment financing districts, and set a baseline of property values in areas that have become dilapidated or unused. And by virtue of their investment in those districts, increase the property values and then allow the municipalities to capture all the tax revenue that's produced because of the increase. Now, you say, well, weren't they going to capture that tax revenue anyway? And that's true to some extent, but the average property tax bill in the city is only about 20% city tax. The rest of it is school district or county tax. But what the legislature allowed is whenever you make those investments and you increase that property value, that you capture, the city captures all those new revenues. This TIF district was created by my predecessor with great foresight back in, I think, 2006. But unfortunately, when they set the baseline, the values of downtown never increased beyond that baseline. In fact, because of the recession, they decreased quite dramatically. And so the TIF district never was energized or activated, never produced any revenue. But with the new incentives and investments downtown, the TIF district is now producing revenue. And with a combination of the increased revenues from the TIF district and the hospitality revenues, because of these investments, the city is going to be able to, in April, borrow $20 million to reinvest in infrastructure back downtown. $20 million that are produced exclusively by the result of the investments we have made so far themselves. Now those monies will go to building new parking decks, 2 new parking decks. Will go to streetscapes and amenities downtown. We'll go to the construction of a new basketball center within the TIF district downtown, which alone will be over $4 million. Ladies and gentlemen, if we tried to raise millage and property tax to generate this amount of revenue, we'd increase every property taxpayer's tax bill by $40 per every $100,000 value of their property. We're saving that because we are receiving the dividends of the investment that we have made, and that kind of leveraging will continue. Downtown success is a product of the cooperation of many entities in real dollars. If you look at the major downtown projects in the last 5 years, the Performing Arts Center, the hotel, the museum, the city center, the Crest building, the Waters building, the health science facility, the parking decks, Hope Health, and the basketball center, those projects represent over $130 million. $130 million of investment downtown just in the last 5 years. And what's amazing about that number is only about 25% of those dollars are city dollars. The overwhelming majority of those dollars come from other places. About 25% of them come from other governmental entities, the county, the federal government, and the state, with thanks to Senator Leatherman, the state, making up about 2/3 of that amount. But half of those dollars are private dollars. Private dollars that are reinvigorating the tax revenues and allowing us to continue with these investments. What's more important, perhaps, is that of the city dollars, none of those dollars, as I've said, come from our general fund. Those dollars are all product of revenues collected because of the investment themselves. And it's by that method, the cooperation between these governmental entities, between the city and the university and the state and the county and the federal government, along with nonprofit and private investors, creating the environment of interaction and cooperation and indeed massive and historic change. And this approach hasn't stopped downtown. Neighborhoods surrounding downtown, particularly those in north, northwest, northeast, Florence, were like downtown, long ignored and deteriorated. Hundreds of abandoned derelict properties create an environment of crime and devalued communities. But the city is responding there with the same method we responded downtown. We begin with more police and the community action team, stronger codes enforcement through the leadership of Commander Shells, who's here with us tonight, or this afternoon, as well as over $3.3 million in investment in reinvigorating these neighborhoods. This is being led by Councilwoman Irvin and her subcommittee, and they've already begun by improved lighting throughout numerous neighborhoods, creating community gardens, and hiring a consultant group to provide more action items for council to be acting on in the coming months, all modeled on our success downtown. Ultimately, there's 2 ways to govern. There's a cynical approach in which politicians play on people's anxieties and their fears. They make people afraid, and they tell them who's to blame. They excite the zeal of angry ideology with language of absolutes, energizing some small group against another small group, and at the same time alienating and disaffecting the majority of citizens who only want civility and results. Now, this approach can and does get politicians elected. It happens every day. But it cannot accomplish anything else. It cannot accomplish anything else. It can not produce any result other than the status quo. The other approach is more difficult by far. It requires coalition building. It requires compromise. It requires that leaders exchange the comfort and the simplicity of ideological absolutes for the complexities of negotiating among competing demands to achieve a result. It's precisely this spirit of pragmatism and this loyalty to the ideal of doing whatever it is that works. It's precisely that commitment that built this city during our last great expansion. And it's that commitment that will continue to serve as our creed as we build a new history. Thank you for having me today.